The photograph should have gotten her killed. Instead, it made her untouchable. When American photojournalist Elara Vale accidentally captured Seoul's most dangerous mafia boss during a midnight confrontation, she thought she'd found her next story. She had no idea she'd just stepped into a war 3 decades in the making, one that connected her dead father to the man who now controlled half the city's underground. Cade Juan doesn't let witnesses live, but he can't bring himself to erase the woman who somehow photographed the one part of him he thought he'd buried forever. Drop a like and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came down like bullets on Gangnam's neon-soaked pavement, turning the streets into fractured mirrors of light and shadow. Elara Vale stood beneath a flickering storefront awning at 2:47 a.m., camera clutched against her chest, watching the city bleed color into darkness. She'd been in Seoul for 11 days. 11 days since she'd scattered her father's ashes in Atlanta and bought a one-way ticket to anywhere that wasn't home. 11 days of walking until exhaustion replaced grief. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Chase reflections. Capture movement. Stay busy enough to forget the empty chair at Thanksgiving, the unanswered voicemails still sitting in her phone, the way her father's hospital room had smelled like disinfectant and defeat. But Seoul had other plans. The first sign of trouble came as engine noise, low, predatory, wrong for the late hour. 3 black sedans rolled to a stop 50 meters ahead, doors opening in synchronized silence. Men emerged wearing suits too expensive for street muscle, moving with the kind of precision that came from military training or worse. Elara's photojournalist instincts kicked in before common sense could intervene. She raised her camera, adjusted the aperture for low light, and started shooting. Through the lens, she watched the scene unfold like a choreographed violence. 8 men forming a perimeter around a central figure she couldn't quite see, hands hovering near concealed weapons, eyes scanning rooftops and alleyways with practiced paranoia. Then the crowd parted, and Elara's breath caught. The man at the center couldn't have been older than his mid-30s, but he carried himself like someone who'd stopped counting years and started counting bodies instead. Sharp-featured, dark-haired, dressed in black from collar to cuff, he looked like wealth and ruin had a child and taught it to walk without making sound. But that wasn't what made Elara's hands freeze on the camera. It was his eyes. Even from this distance, even through rain and neon distortion, she could see the emptiness there. Not cruelty, not anger. Just a vast, terrible absence, like someone had scooped out everything soft and left only the machinery of survival behind. He spoke 3 words in Korean, low, controlled, utterly without inflection. Every armed man within 20 meters backed away like he'd detonated a bomb. Elara's shutter clicked, once, twice, 3 times before she realized what she was doing. The last photograph captured him alone beneath a fractured streetlight, rain streaming down his face, surrounded by emptiness he'd created with nothing but his voice. For a split second, his expression shifted, something raw and unguarded surfacing before the mask snapped back into place. Then his gaze cut toward her like a blade finding skin. Their eyes met across 50 meters of rain-dark pavement. Elara's heart stopped. Time suspended. She should have run. Any sane person would have run. Instead, she lowered the camera slowly, deliberately, and held his stare. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find on a rainy Seoul street at 3 in the morning. Then one of his men noticed her. Shouting erupted in Korean. Guns appeared from beneath expensive suit jackets. The man in black raised one hand, palm out, fingers spread, and the chaos froze mid-breath. He said something Elara couldn't hear. His security team hesitated, clearly arguing, but he repeated the command with enough quiet finality that they holstered their weapons and retreated toward the sedans. The man looked at Elara one last time. Then he was gone. The entire encounter had lasted less than 4 minutes, but Elara's hands shook so badly it took 3 attempts to cap her lens. She stood there in the rain, heart hammering against her ribs, trying to process what had just happened. She'd photographed dangerous men before, politicians, warlords, cartel enforcers in Colombia. But none of them had ever looked at her the way this man had, like he'd seen something in her that even she didn't know existed yet. Elara checked her camera's display screen, scrolling through the images with numb fingers. The photographs were perfect. Too perfect. Crystal clear shots of faces, license plates, weapons, evidence that would get someone killed in any city with this kind of underground power structure. Her journalism instincts screamed at her to keep them. Her survival instincts screamed louder to delete everything and pretend this night never happened. She was still debating when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, Korean area code. Alara stared at the screen for 5 full seconds before answering. Ms. Vale. The voice was male, lightly accented, terrifyingly calm. You've had an interesting evening. Her blood turned to ice water. Who is this? Someone who would very much like those photographs to remain private. I don't know what you're talking about. A soft exhale. Not quite a laugh, but close. The camera in your hands is a Canon EOS R5. You were standing beneath the awning of a closed electronics shop at the intersection of Gangnam Daero and Bonjunsa Row. You took 17 photographs between 2:51 and 2:54 a.m. 14 of them are unusable due to motion blur or obstruction. 3 of them are exceptional. Alara's throat closed. The men in those photographs belong to an organization called the Raven Circle, the voice continued. They've been engaged in a territorial dispute with another group for the past 6 months. If they discover you possess evidence of tonight's meeting, you will disappear before sunrise. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Are you threatening me? I'm offering you protection. I don't need protection from some... Yes, the voice interrupted gently. You do. You simply don't know it yet. Silence stretched between them, filled only by rain and distant traffic. Delete the photographs, the man said. Then go back to your hotel and forget you ever walked down this street. And if I don't? Another pause, longer this time, weighted with something Alara couldn't identify. Then I'll meet you on the rooftop of the Lotte Tower tomorrow at sunset, he said quietly, and we'll discuss exactly how much danger you're in. The line went dead. Alara stood in the rain, phone pressed to her ear, heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something her father had once called her catastrophically bad self-preservation instincts. Curiosity. The kind that got journalists killed in war zones and mafia territories alike. Alara looked down at her camera one more time, at the photograph of the man standing alone beneath broken light, carrying loneliness like a second shadow. Then she saved the images to her encrypted cloud storage and headed back toward her hotel. The next morning arrived with brutal Seoul sunshine and a hangover Alara hadn't earned through drinking. She'd spent most of the night researching Gangnam's criminal organizations on her laptop, falling down rabbit holes of Korean news sites and expat forum threads discussing things that probably shouldn't be discussed on public internet. The Raven Circle came up repeatedly, always in whispers, always in connection with disappearances, money laundering through luxury real estate, and violence so swift and surgical it rarely made headlines. But the other name that kept surfacing was worse: Black Viper Syndicate, the organization that supposedly controlled everything the Raven Circle wanted. Alara found herself staring at a 3-year-old news photograph of a charity gala in Seoul. Wealthy businessmen in tuxedos, politicians smiling for cameras, the usual theater of legitimacy that powerful criminals performed in expensive ballrooms. And there, in the background, barely visible behind a cluster of suited figures, him, the man from last night. The caption identified him only as Cade Hwan, private investor. Alara's hands shook as she typed the name into Google. The results were disturbingly sparse for someone who appeared at high-profile events. A few business registrations, a charitable foundation focused on orphanages and youth programs, property records showing ownership of a penthouse in Gangnam's most exclusive tower. Nothing that screamed Mafia Boss. Everything that screamed carefully constructed false identity. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Alara answered without thinking. Ms. Vale. Different voice this time, younger, warmer, with a slight American accent underneath the Korean formality. My name is Lucien Huan. My brother would like to know if you're planning to attend the meeting, he suggested. Your brother? Cade. A pause. The man you photographed last night. Alara's mouth went dry. How did you get this number? The same way we got your hotel information, your passport details, and the name of the coffee shop you visited this morning. No threat in his tone, just matter-of-fact presentation of surveillance capability. You ordered an Americano with oat milk and sat by the window for 47 minutes researching things that could get you disappeared. Jesus Christ. For what it's worth, Lucian continued, I told him this was a terrible idea, meeting you, offering protection, getting involved at all. But Cade doesn't listen to me when he's made up his mind about something. What's he made up his mind about? Silence stretched across the line, the kind of silence that communicated volumes. Sunset, Lucian said finally. Lotta Tower observation deck. There's a private section on the east side. Security will be expecting you. And if I don't show up? Then you'll spend the rest of your time in Seoul, looking over your shoulder, wondering which shadow belongs to the Raven Circle and which belongs to us. His voice softened. Come to the meeting, Ms. Vale. Whatever you think you know about my brother, you're wrong. The line disconnected. Alara sat in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in the dark television screen, trying to convince herself this was insane. She should go to the American embassy. She should book the next flight to Atlanta. She should delete the photographs and forget any of this ever happened. Instead, she spent the afternoon editing the images from last night, studying Cade Juan's face in frozen pixels, trying to understand what she'd seen in that split second of unguarded expression. Not cruelty, not calculation, exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been surviving so long they'd forgotten what living felt like. At 5:47 p.m., Alara left her hotel wearing jeans, a leather jacket, and her camera bag slung across her shoulder like armor. The Lotta Tower pierced the sky like a glass needle, its observation deck offering 360-degree views of Seoul's endless sprawl. Alara rode the elevator to the top floor, heart hammering so loud she was sure the other passengers could hear it. The main observation area was crowded with tourists and couples watching sunset paint the city in shades of gold and rust. But the eastern section, cordoned off with velvet ropes and a single security guard who nodded at Alara like he'd been expecting her, was empty except for one figure standing at the glass. Cade Juan. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than Alara's entire travel budget, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city like a king surveying territory he'd conquered but never learned to love. Alara approached slowly, every instinct screaming at her to run. He didn't turn around. You came, he said quietly. You didn't give me much choice. There's always a choice. Finally, he looked at her. You could have deleted the photographs, gone to the embassy, left Korea entirely. Instead, you researched my organization, kept the evidence, and walked directly into a private meeting with someone you believe is dangerous. Are you? Dangerous? A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Yes. Then why am I still breathing? Cade turned fully toward her, and Alara saw his face clearly for the first time. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes carrying weight no 30-something should have to hold, mouth set in a line somewhere between control and collapse. Because you saw something in that photograph, he said. Something I didn't mean to show. Alara's throat tightened. What did I see? He was quiet for a long moment, gaze drifting back toward the city. The truth, he said finally, that I'm very, very tired. The confession hung between them like broken glass, sharp-edged and impossible to ignore. Alara found herself stepping closer without conscious decision. The Raven Circle, she said. The man on the phone said they'd kill me if they knew about the photographs. He was correct. But you're not going to kill me. No. Why not? Cade looked at her with something that might have been curiosity or might have been recognition. Because I've spent 15 years erasing people who saw too much, he said quietly. And I'm not sure I can do it anymore. The honesty in his voice hit Alara like a physical blow. This wasn't a performance. This was a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't name, admitting he'd run out of places to hide. The photographs, Cade continued. Delete them or give them to me. Either way, they can't exist. And if I refuse, then the Raven Circle will find you, and I won't be able to stop what happens next. Alara pulled out her camera, turning it over in her hands. There's a photograph my father took, she said softly. Afghanistan, 2003. A little girl standing in rubble, holding a doll with one arm missing. He won the Pulitzer for that image. Do you know what he told me when I asked why he didn't help her instead of photographing her? Cade waited. He said, "Some moments are too important to interrupt. You witness them, you document them, and you carry the weight of what you saw for the rest of your life." She looked up at Cade. "That's what you are," she said. "A moment too important to interrupt." Something cracked in his expression. Just a hairline fracture, but enough to show the human underneath the armor. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes," Elara said. "I do." For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Cade reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, old, creased, edges worn from being handled too many times. He held it toward her. Elara took it carefully. The image showed two men in their 20s, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera outside what looked like a Seoul nightclub. One of them she didn't recognize. The other was unmistakably her father, 30 years younger, but the same crooked smile, the same laugh lines around his eyes. Her hands started shaking. "How?" "Your father saved my father's life," Cade said quietly. 1995, during a territorial war that nearly destroyed both our families. He pulled him out of a burning building in Itaewon while rival factions were shooting through the windows. Elara couldn't breathe. "My father never forgot that debt," Cade continued. "He spent years trying to locate your father, trying to repay him. But by then, your father had left Korea, married your mother, started a new life where that violence couldn't follow. He never mentioned any of this. He was protecting you." Cade's voice carried a weight that suggested he understood that impulse intimately. "From this world, from people like me." Elara looked at the photograph again, at her father's young face full of the kind of reckless courage that had defined his entire journalism career. "You knew who I was," she whispered. "When you saw me last night, you knew." "Not immediately." Cade's jaw tightened. "But when my security team ran your identification, your name appeared in my father's old files, along with instructions that if any member of the Vale family ever entered Seoul, they were to be offered every protection my organization could provide." "Your father's dead." "Yes. But you're honoring his promise anyway." Cade's eyes met hers, dark, exhausted, carrying 15 years of violence like stones in his pockets. "It's the only promise I have left that means anything," he said. The sunset had faded to deep purple, the city lights beginning their nightly ignition across the skyline. Elara stood at the glass beside this man who should terrify her, but somehow didn't, holding a photograph that connected their families across decades and oceans. "What happens now?" she asked. Cade was quiet for a long moment. "The Raven Circle knows you exist," he said finally. "They'll be searching for the photographer from last night. I can provide security. A safe location, but you'll need to stay close until the situation stabilizes." "How close?" "My penthouse." He said it without inflection, like he was suggesting a business hotel rather than inviting her into his private fortress. "There's a guest suite. Full security. You'll be safer there than anywhere else in Seoul." Elara should have said no. Every rational instinct screamed at her to refuse. But she looked at this exhausted mafia boss standing in the twilight, holding the weight of his entire empire alone, and realized something that should have terrified her. She didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not before she understood what she'd accidentally photographed, the truth beneath the armor that nobody else seemed to see. "One condition," Elara said. Cade waited. "I keep the camera." A smile ghosted across his face. Real this time, brief as lightning, but present. "Deal." He extended his hand. Elara shook it, feeling calluses that belonged on a fighter rather than a businessman, noticing the way he held himself like violence was a language he'd spoken so long he'd forgotten how to say anything gentle. Neither of them realized it then, standing high above the burning city, but they just stepped across a line neither could uncross. The photograph had connected them. But it was this moment, this handshake in the dying light, that sealed their fate. Behind them, Seoul glittered like a river of neon running toward an ocean of night. And somewhere in that darkness, Victor Seo watched through binoculars from an adjacent building, smile spreading slow and cold across his face as he realized Cade Juan had just made his first genuinely human mistake in 15 years. He'd let someone close. And that meant everything was about to burn. The penthouse occupied the entire 47th floor of Gangnam's most exclusive residential tower, and stepping into it felt like entering a mausoleum built for someone still breathing. Elara followed Cade through the private elevator entrance at 9:32 p.m., her camera bag feeling heavier with each step across marble floors so polished they reflected the city lights bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything was steel, glass, and cold angles, a fortress designed by someone who'd forgotten what warmth felt like. "Guest suite is down the hall," Cade said, not looking at her. "Second door on the left. Security codes are on the nightstand. Don't open the windows. Don't answer the door unless I'm standing on the other side of it." Elara set her bag down slowly. "How long do I need to stay here?" "Until the Raven Circle stops looking for you." "How long is that?" Cade finally turned, and the exhaustion in his face was so naked it hurt to witness. "I don't know." He moved toward the kitchen, a pristine stretch of black granite and untouched appliances that looked like they'd never cooked an actual meal, and pulled a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing a nightly ritual. Poured 2 glasses, slid one toward her. Elara approached cautiously, like he was a wild animal that might bolt if she moved too fast. "I don't drink whiskey," she said. "Tonight you do." Something in his voice made her pick up the glass. They stood on opposite sides of the counter, the city sprawling beneath them like a living creature made of light and shadow, neither quite sure what happened next. "Your father," Elara said quietly. "When did he die?" Cade's jaw tightened. 3 years ago. Heart attack. Very sudden. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He drank, throat working against the burn. He spent his entire life building this empire. Died before he could see it devour his sons. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to draw blood. Elara sipped the whiskey, felt it scorch down her throat. "You have a brother." "Lucien." A ghost of something that might have been affection crossed Cade's face. "He's 28, smart enough to survive this world, but too human to belong in it." "Like you?" Cade looked at her with eyes that had forgotten how to lie about suffering. "I stopped being human a long time ago." "That's not true." "You don't know me." "No," Elara agreed, "but I know that photograph. The one I took. You looked at me like you'd forgotten anyone still existed outside your empire." Cade set his glass down hard enough to crack the silence. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't make me into something I'm not." "What are you then?" "Dangerous, violent, exactly what you should be running from." Elara held his gaze. "Then why did you let me in?" For several seconds, Cade didn't answer, just stared at her with an expression caught between anger and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Because I'm tired," he said finally, voice stripped raw, "and you looked at me like I was still worth saving." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Then his phone buzzed. The shift in Cade's expression was instantaneous, armor slamming back into place, the exhausted man vanishing behind the Mafia Boss like a mask welded to skin. He answered in rapid Korean, voice cold and clipped. Elara watched his body language change, spine straightening, shoulders squaring, every soft edge hardening into weapon-grade control. He spoke 3 short sentences. Disconnected. Looked at Elara with eyes that had gone flat and dead. "Stay here," he said. "Don't leave this apartment. Don't go near the windows. Don't contact anyone." "What's happening?" "Something I need to handle." "Cade, lock the door behind me." Then he was gone. Elara stood alone in the cold marble fortress, heart hammering, whiskey burning in her stomach, wondering what the hell she'd just walked into. She didn't see Cade again for 36 hours. The first night, Elara barely slept. She wandered the penthouse like a ghost, cataloging its emptiness. A gym that looked military grade. A study filled with surveillance monitors showing camera feeds from across the city. A bedroom so impersonal it could have belonged to anyone. No photographs. No personal items. Nothing that suggested a human being actually lived here. Just a man who'd hollowed himself out until only the empire remained. The second day crawled past in suffocating silence. Elara tried to work, editing photographs, responding to emails from her editor in Atlanta, pretending her life hadn't just detoured into something out of a crime thriller. But her hands kept returning to the images from that first night. Cade standing alone beneath fractured neon, carrying loneliness like gravity. She should delete them. Every rational instinct screamed at her to erase the evidence and forget she'd ever seen past his armor. Instead, she printed the best one on the small portable printer in her camera bag and pinned it to the wall beside her bed. A reminder that the man who terrified Seoul's underworld was also human enough to look exhausted. The third morning arrived with Seoul sunshine and a sound that made Alara's breath stop. The front door opening, footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, uneven, wrong. Alara grabbed her camera like a weapon and moved toward the bedroom door. Cade appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Alara's stomach dropped. His suit jacket was missing, white shirt torn at the shoulder, knuckles split and bloody, a cut above his left eyebrow still leaking crimson down the side of his face. He moved like everything hurt. Jesus Christ, Alara breathed. Cade didn't look at her, just crossed to the sink, turned on the water, and started washing blood from his hands with mechanical precision. Alara approached slowly. "You need a hospital." "No. You're bleeding. I'm fine." "You're not fine." Cade's hand stilled under the water. "Drop it." But Alara had spent her entire career photographing war zones and disaster sites, documenting human suffering until it became a language she spoke fluently. She knew what pain looked like when someone was pretending it didn't exist. She grabbed a clean dishcloth from the drawer, soaked it in warm water, and stepped into his space before he could retreat. "Hold still," she said. Cade went rigid. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning that cut before it gets infected." "I said I'm fine, and I said hold still." She reached up and pressed the cloth gently against his forehead. Cade flinched like she'd struck him. Alara froze. "Did I hurt you?" "No." His voice came out strangled. "You didn't." But she understood immediately what he wasn't saying. This man ruled half of Seoul through violence and fear, commanded armies of soldiers who'd kill on his word alone, carried enough blood on his hands to drown in, and he'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. Alara's throat tightened. She kept cleaning the wound, working carefully around the cut, hyper-aware of how close they were standing. Cade's breath was uneven, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath skin. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "Handling a situation." "What kind of situation requires you to come home covered in blood?" "The kind you don't want to know about." Alara rinsed the cloth, wrung it out, resumed her work. "Try me." For a long moment, Cade said nothing. Then, "The Raven Circle tried to move on one of our warehouses," he said quietly. 20 men, military-grade weapons. They wanted to send a message. "What message?" "That they're not afraid anymore." Alara's hands stilled. "Did anyone die?" Cade's silence was answer enough. She should have been horrified, should have pulled away from this man who'd just admitted to violence that probably left bodies in its wake. Instead, she found herself looking at the exhaustion carved into every line of his face and recognizing the weight he carried, the kind that came from making impossible choices in a world with no good options. "You're angry," she said. "I'm always angry." "No." Alara's voice was barely a whisper. "You're scared." Cade's eyes snapped to hers, dark, wounded, furious at being seen so clearly. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Pretend you understand." "I'm not pretending." Alara set the cloth down, but she didn't step back. "You're terrified that one day you won't be able to stop the violence, that you'll disappear completely into this thing you've built, and there won't be anything human left to save." Cade's breathing had gone ragged. "Get away from me," he said. "No." "Alara, you let me stay here because you wanted someone to see you," she interrupted. "So I'm seeing you, and I'm not running." Something cracked in his expression, like a dam breaking under pressure it was never designed to hold. Then his phone buzzed again, the moment shattered. Cade stepped back, armor slamming into place so fast Alara almost got whiplash watching the transformation. He checked the screen, jaw tightening. "I need to go," he said. "Again?" "There's a meeting. Something I can't delegate." "When will you be back?" Cade looked at her with eyes that had gone cold and distant. "I don't know." Then he was gone again. And Alara stood alone in the kitchen, holding a blood-soaked dishcloth, wondering how someone could be so present and so absent at the same time. The pattern repeated itself for the next week. Cade would disappear for days, return looking progressively more destroyed, and vanish again before Alara could do more than confirm he was still breathing. She started leaving coffee on the counter before sunrise. Black. No sugar. The way she'd noticed he drank it that first morning. He never acknowledged the gesture, but the cups were always empty when she woke up. Small rituals began building between them like sediment, layers of unspoken communication that felt more intimate than conversation. She'd find her camera equipment cleaned and return to her bag after she left it scattered across the living room. He'd discover warm food waiting on the counter after coming home at 3 a.m. from whatever violence he'd been handling. Neither of them mentioned it. But the apartment started feeling less like a mausoleum and more like something dangerously close to cohabitation. Then Lucien showed up. Alara was editing photographs in the living room when the elevator doors opened and a man stepped out who looked like Cade if someone had dialed down the intensity and dialed up the humanity. Same sharp features, same dark eyes. But where Cade carried exhaustion like armor, Lucien wore charm like a shield, smiling easily, moving with the kind of loose confidence that came from never quite understanding how dangerous the world actually was. "You must be Alara," he said in perfect English, extending his hand. "I'm Lucien, the better-looking brother." Alara shook his hand cautiously. "Does Cade know you're here?" "God, no. He'd lose his mind if he knew I was bypassing his security protocols." Lucien dropped onto the couch like he owned the place. "But I figured if my brother's going to hide an American photojournalist in his fortress, the least I can do is make sure she hasn't gone completely stir-crazy." Despite herself, Alara smiled. "I'm managing." "Liar?" Lucien's grin was infectious. Nobody manages being locked in Cade's emotional prison without losing their mind a little. "Come on, I'm taking you out." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Probably not, but when has that ever stopped anyone from having fun?" 20 minutes later, Alara found herself in a crowded night market in Hongdae, surrounded by street food vendors, live music, and a level of chaotic energy that felt like oxygen after drowning in the penthouse's sterile silence. Lucien moved through the crowd with easy familiarity, buying food from vendors who clearly knew him, switching between Korean and English with fluid grace. "How long have you been living with my brother?" he asked, handing her a skewer of grilled meat. "I'm not living with him. I'm staying in his guest room temporarily." "Right. Temporarily." Lucien's smile turned knowing. "How's he treating you?" "Like I'm a security liability he's obligated to protect." "Sounds about right." Lucien sobered slightly. "Cade's not good at people anymore. He used to be, before our father died and the empire landed on his shoulders. But 15 years of this life burns out everything soft." Alara thought about the exhaustion in Cade's eyes. "What was he like before?" "Human." Lucien's voice carried genuine grief. "He used to laugh, used to care about things that weren't territory or power. Had a girlfriend once, Mina. She was good for him, made him remember he was still a person underneath all the violence." Something cold settled in Alara's stomach. "What happened to her?" Lucien's expression darkened. "Victor Seo happened." "Who?" "Someone you really don't want to know about." Lucien drained his drink. "He runs a smaller operation, used to work under our father before he decided he wanted his own empire. Mina got caught in the crossfire during a territory dispute 3 years ago. She didn't die, but whatever Victor did to her was bad enough that she disappeared completely. New identity, different country. Cade never saw her again." Alara's throat tightened. "Does he blame himself?" "He blames everyone. Victor, our father for building this world. Himself for not protecting her." Lucien looked at Alara with surprising intensity. "That's why you need to be careful. Cade doesn't let people close anymore because everyone he's ever cared about ends up destroyed." "Then why did he let me in?" Lucien studied her for a long moment. "I think because you saw something in him he thought was dead, and he's desperate enough to believe it might still be salvageable." They walked through the market in silence, surrounded by laughter and music, and the kind of uncomplicated joy that felt foreign after days in Cade's fortress. Then Alara's phone buzzed. Message from an unknown number. She opened it, and her blood turned to ice. The image showed Alara and Lucien at the night market, taken from an elevated position, professional-grade surveillance photography. Beneath it, a single line of text. You should have stayed inside. Alara's hand started shaking. Lucien, she whispered. He looked at the screen. Then his entire demeanor changed, charm evaporating, replaced by something sharp and dangerous that reminded Alara he was still Cade's brother. We need to go, he said quietly. Right now. They moved quickly through the crowd, Lucien's hand on Alara's elbow, steering her toward a side street where a black sedan was already waiting. The driver didn't speak, just drove. Fast. Back toward Gangnam. Back toward the penthouse. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Who sent that message? Someone who wants Cade to know they can reach you anytime they want. Lucien's jaw was tight. This is bad. This is really bad. They arrived at the tower 18 minutes later. The elevator ride felt like descending into a tomb. When the doors opened, Cade was already standing in the living room, and the look on his face made Alara's breath stop. Fury didn't cover it. This was something colder, more controlled, infinitely more dangerous. Inside, he said to Alara, voice flat, dead. Cade, it was my fault, Lucien started. Not now. I just thought... I said not now. Lucien went silent. Cade looked at Alara with eyes that had gone completely empty. Guest room, now. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain, but something in his expression told her this wasn't the time. She retreated to her room and closed the door, then pressed her ear against it, shamelessly eavesdropping. The argument that erupted was in Korean, but she didn't need translation to understand the rage bleeding through Cade's controlled syllables. She responded with equal intensity, back and forth, escalating. Then Cade said something that made Lucien go silent. Footsteps approached her door. Alara backed away quickly. Cade entered without knocking. The cut above his eyebrow had scabbed over, but new bruises darkened his jaw. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like exhaustion and fury had merged into something that might shatter at the slightest pressure. Show me the message, he said. Alara handed over her phone. Cade stared at the image for a long time. Then he did something that terrified her more than any weapon could. He smiled, cold, empty, absolutely devoid of humor. Victor, he said softly. Lucien mentioned that name. Of course he did. Cade handed the phone back. Did he tell you what Victor does to people who get between him and what he wants? No. Good. Because if you knew, you'd be on the next flight to Atlanta. Alara's throat tightened. What does he want? To destroy me. Cade's voice carried no emotion at all. He's been planning it for 3 years, building alliances, waiting for the right opening, and I just handed it to him. How? Cade looked at her with something that might have been regret or might have been resignation. By letting you exist in my life. The words hit like a physical blow. Alara stepped back. I didn't ask for any of this. I know. I didn't ask you to protect me. I know. Then let me leave. No. Why not? Cade closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly Alara's back was against the wall, his hands braced on either side of her head, his face inches from hers. Because Victor already knows about you, he said quietly, dangerously. Because the Raven Circle already has your photograph. Because if you leave this apartment, you'll be dead within 24 hours, and your father saved my father's life, which means I owe him a debt I can never repay. So you're staying here whether you like it or not until I figure out how to fix this. Alara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. You can't keep me prisoner. Watch me. Cade, I've already lost 1 person to Victor's games, he interrupted, voice raw. I'm not losing another. The confession hung in the air between them. Alara saw it then, the fear underneath the fury, the desperation hiding behind the armor. This wasn't about control. This was about a man who'd failed to protect someone he cared about and was willing to burn the entire city down before it happened again. What happened to Mina? Alara asked softly. Cade went rigid. Lucien told you. Only her name. For a long moment, Cade said nothing, just stared at Alara with eyes carrying weight that would have crushed anyone else. Victor took her, he said finally, voice stripped to nothing. Held her for 3 days. Did things I won't describe. then sent her back broken enough that she couldn't stand to be in the same city as me anymore. Alara's throat closed. She blamed you? She blamed herself for loving someone like me. Cade's hands tightened into fists against the wall. And she was right. Everyone I touch ends up destroyed. That's not true. Yes, Cade said quietly. It is. He pushed away from the wall, started to leave, then stopped at the doorway without turning around. Tomorrow morning, you're moving to a different safe house, he said. Somewhere Victor doesn't know about. Somewhere I can keep you alive until this is over. And then what? Then you go home to Atlanta and forget any of this ever happened. What if I don't want to forget? Cade's shoulders tightened. You don't get a choice. Then he was gone. And Alara stood alone in her borrowed room, heart racing, mind spinning, trying to process what had just happened. She should be terrified, should be planning her escape, should be doing anything except what she was actually doing, which was noticing the photograph she'd pinned to the wall. Cade standing alone beneath fractured neon, carrying loneliness like gravity. She'd thought capturing that moment was about witnessing someone's truth, but maybe it was about something more dangerous. Maybe it was about recognizing herself in someone else's exhaustion. Two people who'd forgotten how to let themselves be human, colliding in a city built on neon and violence. Alara grabbed her camera and pulled up the images from tonight's market, the ones she'd taken before everything went wrong. Scrolled through them until she found it. A candid shot of Lucien mid-laugh, surrounded by street vendors and warm light, looking exactly like Cade probably used to before the Empire hollowed him out. She stared at the image for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and started searching for everything she could find about Victor Seo. Because if Cade thought she was just going to sit in a safe house while he fought this war alone, he clearly didn't understand who he'd let into his fortress. Alara Vale didn't run from danger. She documented it, and she was done being protected. But the next morning arrived with apocalyptic Seoul rain and a knock on Alara's door that made her stomach drop. She opened it, expecting Cade. Found Lucien instead. His face was swollen on one side, lips split, moving like his ribs hurt. Jesus, Alara breathed. What happened? Cade happened. Lucien's smile was pained. He's not happy I took you out last night. Made his feelings very clear. He hit you? We hit each other. It's kind of our thing. Lucien winced as he moved into the room. But he's right. I shouldn't have bypassed security. Shouldn't have put you at risk. He trailed off, looking suddenly exhausted. I wanted you to see that Seoul isn't just Cade's empire, that there's still beauty here underneath all the violence. Alara's chest tightened. Why? Because my brother's forgotten. Lucien met her eyes, and I think maybe you can remind him. Before Alara could respond, Cade appeared in the doorway. One look at his face, and Alara knew something had changed. He held out a folder. Read this, he said. Alara took it cautiously. Inside were surveillance photographs, professional grade taken from multiple angles over several weeks. All of her. Getting coffee in Itaewon, walking through Namsan Tower, entering her hotel, sitting alone in cafes editing photographs. Every single one dated before that first night in Gangnam, before Cade ever knew she existed. Victor's been watching you since the day you arrived in Seoul, Cade said quietly. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Alara's hands started shaking. I don't understand. He knew your father saved mine. Cade's voice was flat, mechanical. He knew that debt still existed in our family records. He was waiting for someone connected to the Vale name to enter Seoul. Why? Because Victor understands leverage. Cade's jaw tightened. He knew that if anyone from your family appeared, I'd be obligated to protect them. And protection creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates openings. The folder slipped from Alara's fingers. You're saying he planned this, she whispered. All of it. Not all of it. Cade's eyes met hers. I don't think he anticipated you walking directly into a confrontation your first week. But he was tracking you, waiting for the right moment to make contact, to use you against me. Alara felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. That night in Gangnam was real, Cade interrupted. The Raven Circle, the photographs, my decision to protect you, all real. But Victor's been orchestrating the pressure from the beginning. Lucian swore quietly in Korean. Alara backed away until she hit the wall. So what am I? Bait? Collateral damage. Cade's voice carried no inflection at all. Victor doesn't want to kill you. He wants me to care about you, to prioritize your survival over strategic decisions, to make emotional choices instead of tactical ones. Does it matter? Alara's voice came out strangled. Whether he planned it or not, does it actually change anything? Cade looked at her for a long moment. No, he said finally. It doesn't. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Then what happens now? Alara asked. Now we use it. Cade's expression hardened into something that reminded Alara exactly why Seoul's underworld feared him. Victor thinks he's manipulating me. Fine. Let him think that. But he's forgotten something important. What? Cade's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. I learned from the same bastard who taught him how to play these games. He pulled out his phone and typed something quickly, then looked at Alara with eyes that had gone absolutely empty. Victor wants a meeting, he said. Says he has information about your father that I'll want to hear. He's suggesting a neutral location, a cafe in Mapo, public, daytime, completely safe. It's a trap, Lucian said immediately. Obviously, Cade pocketed his phone. But he's counted on me refusing to let Alara attend, expected me to keep her locked away while I handle it alone. So what are you going to do? Alara asked. Cade looked at her with something that might have been apology or might have been calculation. I'm going to bring you with me, he said quietly, and we're going to give Victor exactly what he thinks he wants. Alara's blood ran cold. You're using me as bait. I'm using his assumptions against him. Cade's voice was perfectly controlled. Victor expects me to be emotional, protective, predictable, so I'm going to walk into that cafe with you by my side and show him that I'm none of those things. Even if it puts her in danger? Lucian demanded. She's already in danger. Cade's eyes never left Alara's face. Has been since the moment she landed in Seoul. At least this way we control the environment. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Alara stepped forward. When's the meeting? She asked. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Then I'll be there. Alara, Lucian started. No. She looked at Cade with a steadiness she didn't feel. If I'm already collateral damage, I might as well make it count. Something flickered across Cade's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. This isn't a game, he said. I know. Victor is dangerous in ways you can't imagine. I know that too. Then why are you agreeing to this? Alara thought about the photograph she'd taken that first night, about the exhaustion in Cade's eyes, about a man who'd forgotten how to be human carrying the weight of an empire alone. Because you need someone to watch your back, she said quietly, and I'm tired of hiding. Cade stared at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. Then he nodded once. Tomorrow, he said. 2 p.m., Mapo district. We end this. And standing in that borrowed room with rain hammering against bulletproof glass, Alara realized she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She was no longer an observer documenting violence from behind a camera lens. She was part of it now. And there was no way back. The cafe in Mapo district looked aggressively normal. Wooden tables, potted plants in the windows, baristas pulling espresso shots with the kind of practiced indifference that suggested they'd witnessed countless mundane dramas unfold in this exact space, which made it the perfect location for a trap. Alara sat across from Cade at a corner table, camera bag at her feet, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows in its usual chaos. Pedestrians, delivery bikes, the endless urban churn that continued regardless of whatever violence was about to detonate inside this deceptively peaceful room. Cade looked like he'd carved himself from stone. Dark suit, expressionless face. Hands folded on the table with the kind of stillness that preceded either negotiation or murder. Alara had watched him prepare that morning, checking concealed weapons, issuing orders to security teams positioned throughout the district, transforming from exhausted human back into the version of himself that made grown men flinch. But she'd also noticed the way his hands shook slightly while buttoning his shirt, the way he'd looked at her before they left the penthouse like he was memorizing her face, just in case. He's late, Alara said quietly. He's testing patience. Cade's voice was flat. Standard intimidation tactic. Make your opponent wait. Let anxiety build. Walk in with all the psychological advantage. Does it work on you? No. But Alara saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes tracked every person who entered the cafe with predatory focus. This man was terrified. He was just too well trained to show it. Then the door opened, and Victor Seoul walked in. He looked nothing like what Alara had expected. No visible scars, no obvious menace, just a man in his early 40s wearing an expensive suit and a smile that belonged on someone's friendly uncle rather than a criminal mastermind. Handsome in an unremarkable way. Forgettable. Except for his eyes. They were the color of dirty ice and completely empty of anything resembling human emotion. Cade. Victor's voice was pleasant, warm, utterly devoid of sincerity. You look tired. Empire keeping you up at night? Cade didn't respond. Victor's gaze shifted to Alara, and she felt her skin crawl. Ms. Vale. He sat down without invitation, ordered an Americano from the passing waitress like this was a business lunch rather than a confrontation. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your father was quite the character. Did he ever tell you about the Itaewon fire? Alara's throat tightened. What do you know about my father? More than you do, apparently. Victor's smile widened. James Vale, photojournalist, won the Pulitzer in 2004, died 6 months ago from a heart attack in his Atlanta home, except it wasn't a heart attack, was it? The world tilted sideways. Cade's expression didn't change, but Alara saw his fingers twitch toward the weapon she knew was holstered beneath his jacket. Careful, Victor said mildly. We're in public. Witnesses everywhere. You shoot me here, and even your influence can't cover that up. What are you talking about? Alara's voice came out strangled. Victor pulled a folder from his briefcase, identical to the one Cade had shown her yesterday, and slid it across the table. Your father didn't have a heart attack, he said. He was poisoned, ricin derivative, slow-acting, completely untraceable unless you know what you're looking for. Alara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the folder. Inside were medical documents, autopsy reports, toxicology screens that showed exactly what Victor claimed. Her father had been murdered. Who? The word barely made it past her lips. Victor looked at Cade and smiled. Why don't you tell her, Cade, about the contract your father signed 30 years ago, about the debt that was never really about gratitude, about what James Vale actually did the night of the Itaewon fire? Cade's face had gone white. Alara looked between them, heart hammering. What is he talking about? Your father didn't just save Cade's father, Victor continued, voice gentle as a knife sliding between ribs. He worked for him. For 3 years, James Vale was on the Black Viper payroll, documenting rival operations, gathering intelligence, photographing targets. He was the reason Cade's father won that territorial war, the reason dozens of men died. The cafe walls seemed to be closing in. You're lying, Alara whispered. Am I? Victor pulled out another photograph. Older, grainier, but unmistakably her father standing beside Cade's father outside what looked like a warehouse, camera around his neck, expression serious. He got paid well. Very well. Until he decided he wanted out. Wanted to go back to America and pretend he'd never been part of this world. Alara couldn't breathe. Cade's father let him go, Victor continued. But debts in this world don't expire just because you change countries. They follow you. They wait. And 30 years later, when someone wanted to send Cade a message about legacy and obligation and the sins fathers passed to sons, shut up, Cade said. His voice was so quiet it barely registered, but the violence underneath it made Victor pause. Your father killed mine 3 years ago, Victor said, turning his attention fully to Cade. Orchestrated his heart attack, made it look natural, took everything I should have inherited and gave it to you instead. So I started planning, started looking for leverage, and I found something beautiful. He gestured at Alara, James Vale's daughter, the only family he had left, the one person whose death would hurt you the same way my father's hurt me. Poetic, don't you think? Alara's vision was swimming. But I didn't need to kill her, Victor continued. I just needed her to exist, to walk into your life carrying her father's camera and his unresolved trauma, to make you care about something other than power. Because once you cared, Cade, you were vulnerable, And vulnerability is the only weapon that works against someone like you. This is insane, Ilara breathed. This is chess. Victor leaned back in his chair. And your father's death, that was my opening move. Making sure you came to Seoul, making sure you carried enough grief and curiosity to go wandering through dangerous neighborhoods with your camera, making sure you'd photograph something that would force Cade to make contact. Cade's hands had disappeared beneath the table, probably wrapped around a weapon, probably calculating how many bullets it would take and whether he could live with the consequences. I didn't kill your father directly, Victor said to Ilara, voice dripping false sympathy, but I made sure the person who did had access to his home, made sure the poison was delivered at exactly the right time, made sure his death looked natural enough that his daughter wouldn't ask too many questions, just enough grief to send her running across the ocean looking for distraction. Ilara's coffee cup shattered in her grip. Blood welled from her palm where ceramic had bitten skin. She didn't feel it. Why are you telling me this? Her voice sounded far away. Because Cade needs to understand something. Victor's smile disappeared. I could have killed you a dozen times in the past 2 weeks. That night at the market with Lucienne. This morning on your way here. Any moment you stepped outside his fortress. But I didn't. Do you know why? Silence. Because your death is only valuable if it destroys him first, Victor said. If I kill you now, he'll just get angry, vengeful, predictable. But if I make him watch you learn the truth, that your father was a criminal, that his family had him murdered, that everything you thought you knew about James Vale was a lie, then you'll hate Cade, blame him. And that breaks him far more effectively than a bullet ever could. Ilara's mind was fracturing. Her father, a criminal, working for the Mafia, getting people killed, murdered because of debts and obligations that predated her existence. And Cade, she looked at him. His face was completely empty. Did you know? She asked. Cade's jaw tightened. Did you fucking know? Not about the murder, he said quietly, but about your father working for mine. Yes, I knew. The confession hit like a physical blow. When? The night I saw your name in the files. And you didn't tell me. No. Why? Cade finally looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes was so raw it hurt to witness. Because I was selfish, he said. Because I wanted you to look at me like I was still human. And I knew that if you learned the truth, you'd see me the same way everyone else does, as a monster who inherited his father's sins. Ilara stood so fast her chair fell backward. Blood dripped from her hand onto the pristine cafe floor. You used me. Yes. You let me stay in your home, drink your coffee, take care of you when you came back bleeding. Let me think we were... Her voice broke. And the whole time you were lying. I was protecting you. By hiding the fact that your family murdered my father? I didn't kill him. Cade's voice was steady despite the emotion bleeding through. I didn't order it. I didn't know it was happening. But you're right. My family's sins are mine to carry, and I should have told you the moment I knew. Victor watched this unfold with the satisfied expression of someone witnessing a masterpiece come together exactly as planned. Beautiful, he murmured. This is even better than I imagined. Cade stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of cold finality that made grown men reconsider their life choices. You've made your point. Now, tell me what you want. What I want? Victor's smile returned. I want you to feel what I felt. Powerless. Betrayed. Watching everything you care about disintegrate because of decisions made by men who died before you could make them answer for their crimes. My father's dead. You can't touch him. No. But I can touch everyone he left behind. Victor stood as well, buttoning his jacket with casual precision. The Raven Circle is mine now. Has been for 6 months. Every territorial dispute, every warehouse raid, every pressure point against your empire, all orchestrated by me. And in 72 hours, I'm going to dismantle everything your father built, starting with the orphanages. Cade went absolutely still. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. Victor's voice was pleasant, conversational. 23 facilities across Seoul. Hundreds of children. All funded by Black Viper money laundering operations. I'm going to expose every single transaction, every illegal dollar, every politician you've bought, every permit you forged. By the end of the week, those orphanages will be shut down. Those children will be scattered into state systems that will destroy them, and your name will be synonymous with child exploitation. For the first time since Victor sat down, Cade's control cracked. They have nothing to do with this. They have everything to do with this. Victor leaned forward. Because they're the only thing you still care about. The only place where you're still human. And I'm going to burn it all down while you watch. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Alara backed away slowly, mind still reeling, trying to process the layers of betrayal and manipulation stacked like corpses. Her father was a criminal. Cade had lied to her. Victor had orchestrated her father's murder. And now children were going to suffer because of a war that started before any of them were born. "What do you want?" Cade asked again, voice stripped to nothing. "I want you to choose." Victor's smile was genuinely delighted. "You can protect your empire, use your resources to cover up the money laundering, save your reputation, maintain control. Or you can protect the orphanages, blow up your entire financial network to keep those facilities running, admit to decades of organized crime, and sacrifice everything your father built. That's not a choice." "Of course it is. You just don't like either option." Victor checked his watch. "You have 72 hours. After that, the evidence goes to the prosecutors, the media, and every rival organization waiting for you to show weakness." He started toward the door, then paused, looked at Alara. "For what it's worth," he said, voice soft, "your father really did save Cade's father that night in Irawan. Pulled him out of a burning building while people were shooting. That part was true. But he did it because he was on payroll. Because loyalty in this world is purchased, not earned. And when he decided that loyalty had an expiration date, well," Victor shrugged, "consequences have a way of catching up." Then he was gone. The cafe returned to its mundane operations around them. Baristas steaming milk, customers scrolling phones. The ordinary world continuing like nothing apocalyptic had just detonated. Alara stood there bleeding onto the floor, staring at Cade across 3 feet of space that felt like continents. "Say something," Cade said quietly. "What is there to say?" "That you understand I didn't know about your father's death, that I would never have—" "But you knew about the rest." Alara's voice was hollow. "You knew he worked for your father, knew he got people killed, and you let me walk around thinking he was a hero. He was complicated. He was a criminal. So am I." Cade took a step toward her. "So is everyone in this room if you look deep enough. Your father made choices in a world with no good options, just like I do. Just like you're doing right now by standing here instead of running." "Don't!" Alara held up her bleeding hand like a barrier. "Don't make this about survival instincts or complicated choices. You lied to me for weeks. While I slept in your home and thought—" Her voice broke. "While I thought maybe you were different. I'm not different. I never claimed to be. You let me believe it anyway." Cade's expression cracked open, just for a second, but enough to show the devastation underneath. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this. No, it doesn't." They stood in the wreckage of whatever fragile thing had been building between them, surrounded by the ordinary cafe sounds that felt obscene in their normalcy. Alara's phone buzzed. Text message from Lucian. "Get out. Now. Victor's men are moving." She looked toward the windows. Black sedans were pulling up outside. Too many, moving with coordinated precision. "Cade," she said. He'd already seen them. His hand disappeared inside his jacket, emerging with a weapon that looked military-grade and completely illegal. "Back door," he said. "Now." They moved. Fast. Through the kitchen where startled staff pressed against walls, out into an alley that reeked of garbage and rain, into a waiting car that Alara hadn't even noticed was there. Lucien was driving. "What the hell happened in there?" he demanded as they peeled away from the curb. "Victor, happened." Cade's voice was mechanical. "He's been planning this for 3 years. The orphanages are his real target. We have 72 hours. To do what? Figure out which version of hell we're choosing." Lucian swore viciously in Korean. They drove in tense silence through midday Seoul traffic, taking random turns, doubling back, executing counter-surveillance protocols that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd fled a compromised location. Alara sat in the back seat, hand wrapped in Cade's handkerchief, mind still trying to process the bombs Victor had detonated. Her father. The man who'd taught her to hold a camera, who'd told her stories about documenting truth in dangerous places, who'd won the Pulitzer for capturing human suffering in Afghanistan, had also worked for organized crime, had gotten people killed, had died because of debts and vengeance and wars that predated her birth. Everything she thought she knew about him was contaminated now, poisoned, just like Victor had poisoned him. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Cade said. "There is nowhere safe. Victor just proved that." "Then somewhere less dangerous." They ended up at a warehouse in an industrial district Alara didn't recognize. Concrete and rust and the kind of emptiness that suggested legitimate business had abandoned this space years ago. Inside, it looked like a military command center. Security monitors, weapons racks, maps of Seoul marked with territorial boundaries and target locations. This was where Cade ran his empire when he wasn't pretending to be a legitimate businessman in his sterile penthouse. This was the truth of who he was. Alara felt sick. "Sit," Cade said, gesturing toward a chair. "I don't want to sit." "Then stand." "But you're bleeding, and you look like you're about to pass out. So sitting might be smarter." "Don't tell me what's smart." Alara's voice came out sharper than intended. "You've been lying to me for weeks. You don't get to pretend you care about my well-being now." Cade flinched like she'd struck him. Lucian cleared his throat. "I'm going to check the perimeter." "No," Cade said. "Stay. She deserves to hear this from both of us." "Hear what?" Alara demanded. Cade sat down heavily, suddenly looking every year of his 34 and then some. "Your father's involvement with my father," he said. "It started in 1994. My father's organization was in a war with 3 rival factions. He needed intelligence, needed documentation of enemy operations that could be used for leverage or blackmail. Your father was already in Seoul covering the economic transition. He had access, credentials, the ability to move through spaces where armed enforcers would be noticed." Alara's nails dug into her palms. "My father approached him," Cade continued. "Offered money, a lot of money. Your father was struggling. Freelance journalism didn't pay well back then. He had debts. He had your mother to think about. They'd just gotten married, so he took the job. And got people killed. Yes. No hesitation, no softening. His photographs identified targets, locations, vulnerabilities. At least 17 people died because of intelligence your father provided." The number hit like a hammer. 17. "Then the Itaewon fire happened," Cade said. "A retaliatory strike. The building was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. My father was trapped inside. Your father pulled him out, saved his life. And in that moment, whatever transactional relationship they'd had became something else. A debt that transcended money. So my father bought his way out with heroism. He bought his way out with guilt." Lucian spoke for the first time, voice gentler than Cade's. He realized what he'd become, what he'd done. And he couldn't live with it anymore. So he made my father promise to let him leave, to never contact him again, to let him go back to America and pretend this chapter never existed. "And your father agreed?" "Yes," Cade said, "because my father understood guilt, understood men who wanted to be better than the choices they'd made. But he also understood debt, so he made your father promise that if anyone in the Huan family ever needed help, if we ever called in that debt, your family would answer." Alara laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "And then your father had mine killed to prevent that debt from being collected." "No." Cade's voice was sharp. "My father died of a heart attack. Natural causes. Victor is lying about that part to destabilize you, to make you hate me more effectively." "How do you know?" "Because I was there when he died. Because I saw the medical reports. Because there was no poison, no conspiracy, just a 68-year-old man whose heart gave out from stress and violence and decades of carrying an empire that should have killed him years earlier." The conviction in his voice made Alara pause. "But Victor is a master manipulator who understands that the most effective lies are the ones wrapped around kernels of truth." Cade stood, moved toward the windows overlooking the empty industrial street. "Your father did work for mine. He was complicit in deaths. That's true. But his death was natural. And my protection of you had nothing to do with manipulation and everything to do with honoring the one promise my father made that was actually worth keeping. Alara's head was spinning. Truth and lies tangled so completely she couldn't tell which threads to pull. The orphanages, she said. Are they really funded by money laundering? Cade's silence was answer enough. So Victor wasn't lying about that. No. Cade's shoulders were rigid. The Black Viper Syndicate runs luxury hotels, real estate development, and underground banking. We launder approximately $400 million annually through legitimate business fronts. $30 million of that goes to funding orphanages, youth programs, and family services across Seoul. Why? Because my father believed that if you're going to be a criminal, you should at least build something that survives after you're gone. Cade turned back toward her. Those facilities provide for children who'd otherwise end up on the streets. They're the only clean thing my family has ever created. And Victor is going to destroy them to hurt me. So choose the orphanages, Alara said. Sacrifice your empire. Let it burn. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. You said yourself, those children are the only thing you still care about, so protect them. If I do that, I lose everything. Cade's voice was tight. The Black Viper Syndicate collapses. Power vacuum opens. Every rival organization in Seoul moves in. The territorial wars that follow will kill hundreds, maybe thousands. And the orphanages still get shut down eventually because without my empire's infrastructure, there's no money to run them anyway. So you're damned either way. Yes. Alara stood there in this warehouse command center, surrounded by the machinery of organized crime, trying to process the impossible mathematics of violence. Save the empire. Lose the children. Save the children. Lose everything. There was no good choice, just degrees of catastrophe. What would your father do? She asked quietly. Cade laughed, sharp, bitter. Probably shoot Victor in the face and deal with the consequences later. That's not a plan. No. But it would feel satisfying. They were quiet for a long moment. Then Lucien spoke. There might be another option. Both Cade and Alara looked at him. Victor's evidence, Lucien said slowly, the documents he plans to leak. They're not admissible in court if they were obtained illegally. If we can prove he's been conducting unlawful surveillance, hacking financial systems, violating privacy laws, then his evidence gets thrown out, Cade finished, and the orphanages stay protected. But your empire still gets exposed, Alara said. Not if we move first. Cade's expression shifted, calculation replacing desperation. If I turn myself in, admit to the money laundering before Victor can leak it, cooperate with prosecutors, offer a deal where I take full responsibility in exchange for the orphanages remaining operational under new management. That's insane, Lucien said flatly. You'd go to prison. Yes. For years. Probably. And you're okay with that? Cade looked at Alara, then at his brother. I've been drowning in my father's empire for 15 years, he said quietly. Maybe prison would feel like freedom. The confession hung in the air. Alara realized with sudden devastating clarity that this was what she'd seen in that first photograph. Not cruelty, not calculation. Exhaustion so complete that self-destruction looked like relief. When would you do it? She asked. Tomorrow morning, before Victor can move, before the 72 hours expire. And you're sure this works? No. Cade's voice was brutally honest. But it's the only option where the children survive. So it's the one I'm choosing. Lucien swore quietly. Alara felt something crack open in her chest, anger and grief, and a horrible understanding that the man standing in front of her was about to sacrifice everything for children he'd never even met, because it was the only good thing his family had ever built, and he couldn't let Victor destroy it. I'm sorry, Cade said, looking at Alara, about your father, about lying, about dragging you into this war. You deserve better than being used as a weapon against me. You didn't use me, Alara said quietly. Victor did. You just... She trailed off, unsure how to finish. I just let myself care about someone I should have kept at distance, Cade finished, which made his plan work perfectly. Their eyes met across the warehouse, and Alara realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She was still here, Still standing in this criminal command center with a mafia boss who'd lied to her and a truth so ugly it should send her running back to Atlanta. But she wasn't running, because underneath all the betrayal and manipulation and violence, she'd seen something real. A man who'd forgotten how to be human, trying desperately to remember before it was too late. "What happens to me?" she asked. "You go home," Cade said. "Tonight. I'll arrange protection until you're safely out of Seoul. After that, Victor has no reason to target you." "And if I don't want to leave?" Cade's expression cracked. "Then you're even more reckless than I thought." Elara stepped closer. "My father made terrible choices," she said quietly. "Got people killed. Lived with guilt that probably destroyed him from the inside. But he also saved your father's life, which means some part of him was still trying to be good despite the damage he'd done. What's your point? That maybe you're not as different from him as you think." Elara held Cade's gaze. "And maybe choosing to destroy yourself to save those children means you're exactly the kind of person worth photographing." For a moment, Cade looked like he might break. Then his phone buzzed. He checked it, and his face went white. "What?" Lucian demanded. Cade turned the screen toward them. The message was from Victor. It contained a single photograph. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of one of the orphanages Cade funded, smiling at the camera. Beneath it, 72 hours just became 24. Choose faster. And Elara watched Cade Juan, the most feared criminal in Seoul, the man who'd survived 15 years of violence and betrayal and empire building, finally shatter completely. Because Victor had just proven he could reach the one thing Cade couldn't protect: the children. And there was absolutely nothing Cade could do to stop what was coming. The photograph of the little boy stayed burned into Cade's retinas like a brand. He stared at his phone screen for 7 seconds that felt like years, watching that child's innocent smile mock every decision he'd ever made, every protection he'd tried to build, every lie he'd told himself about being able to keep something pure alive in his poisoned world. Then he threw the phone so hard it shattered against the concrete wall. "Cade," Lucian started. "Get every available unit to the orphanages, now!" Cade's voice was mechanical, stripped of everything except command. "I want armed security at every location. No one in or out without clearance. No exceptions." "That's 23 facilities," Lucien said. "We don't have enough people." "Then pull them from the hotels, the warehouses, every non-essential operation. I don't care if the entire empire burns as long as those children are protected." Lucian was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in rapid Korean. Elara stood frozen, watching Cade transform into something that made her understand exactly why Seoul's underworld feared him. This wasn't the exhausted man who'd cleaned her camera equipment. This wasn't the human who'd flinched at gentle touch. This was a weapon that had been forged in violence and knew only one language when cornered. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Cade looked at her with eyes that had gone completely empty. "Whatever I have to." Then he was moving, crossing to the weapons rack, pulling out items Elara couldn't identify, but that looked military-grade and absolutely illegal. Checking magazines, holstering guns beneath his jacket with the kind of muscle memory that came from decades of preparation. "You can't just go to war with Victor in the middle of Seoul," Elara said. "Watch me. People will die, and people are already dying." Cade's hand stilled on a tactical vest. "The moment Victor sent that photograph, he declared war. I'm just responding in the only language he understands." "This is insane. This is survival." Elara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You told me you were tired of the violence," she said, "that you wanted to be human again. This isn't being human. This is becoming exactly what Victor wants you to be." Cade's jaw tightened. "Then he wins. You're planning to turn yourself in tomorrow. You were going to sacrifice your empire to save those children the right way. Don't throw that away because Victor moved up his timeline. The right way gets them killed." Cade pulled his arm free. "Victor just proved he can reach them anytime he wants. Legal solutions take time. Cooperation with prosecutors takes time. Those children don't have time. So what's your plan? Storm whatever location Victor's hiding in and shoot everyone who gets in your way? If necessary. And then what? You become a cop killer, a mass murderer, the thing every headline will scream about while those orphanages burn anyway because you're too dead or imprisoned to protect them?" The logic hit Cade like a physical blow. He stood there, gripping the tactical vest, breathing hard, rage and helplessness warring across his face. "Then tell me what to do," he said quietly, "because I'm out of good options." Alara looked at this man who'd lied to her, protected her, dragged her into a war she never asked for, and made a decision that would have terrified her 3 weeks ago. "We find Victor," she said. "We get proof that he murdered my father, that he's been orchestrating this entire thing, that every piece of evidence he has is contaminated by his own criminal activity. Then we give that to the prosecutors alongside your cooperation. It destroys his leverage and protects the orphanages." "That takes time we don't have." "Then we make time." Alara's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "You have resources, connections, people who owe you favors. Use them." Cade stared at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "After everything I lied about, after what my family did to yours." "Because those children don't deserve to suffer for sins committed before they were born." Alara held his gaze. "And because I think you're the only person in this entire mess who actually gives a damn about something other than revenge." For a moment, Cade looked like he might break again. Then Lucien returned, face grim. "Security teams are mobilizing," he said, "but we've got a problem. 3 of the facilities reported suspicious activity in the past hour. Unmarked vans, people watching from parked cars. Victor's already positioning for whatever he's planning." "Then we move faster." Cade turned to Alara. "You said we find Victor. How?" Alara pulled out her backup phone, the one she'd been using since Cade shattered, and opened her photo library. "I've been documenting everything since that first night," she said. "Every location we visited, every person who approached us, every vehicle that followed too long. Somewhere in these images is a pattern, a connection, something that tells us where Victor operates from." She started scrolling, laying out photographs like evidence at a crime scene. Cade and Lucien crowded close, studying each image with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of reading violence like text. "There," Lucien said, pointing at a photo from the night market. "That man in the background. He's in at least 3 other shots from different locations." Alara zoomed in. The face was partially obscured, but the body language was unmistakable. Someone trained in surveillance, trying to blend, but not quite succeeding against a professional photographer's eye. "Run facial recognition," Cade said. Lucien pulled out a tablet, uploaded the image, watched algorithms churn. 30 seconds later, a name appeared. "Lee Jae-sung," Lucien read. "Former military intelligence. Dishonorable discharge 8 years ago for unauthorized surveillance operations. Last known employment," he paused, "private security consultant." "For who?" Cade demanded. More typing. Then Lucien's face went white. "Victor Seo. Lee's been on his payroll for 3 years." The pieces started clicking together. "If Lee's been following us," Alara said, "then he has a base of operations. Somewhere close enough to maintain surveillance without being obvious." "Office building," Cade said immediately. "High-rise with sightlines into Gangnam. Somewhere expensive enough to blend with legitimate business, but secure enough for illegal operations." Lucien was already searching property records. "Victor owns 5 buildings in that profile," he said, "but only one has been flagged by our intelligence for suspicious activity. Cheongdam Tower, 37th floor, registered as an import-export consulting firm." "That's it." Cade's voice carried absolute certainty. "That's where he's running operations." "How do you know?" "Because import-export is the oldest cover story in organized crime." Cade was already moving toward the door. "And Victor's not creative. He's efficient." "Wait!" Alara grabbed her camera bag. "If we're doing this, we do it with evidence. I document everything, every person we see, every conversation, every illegal thing Victor does. We build a case that destroys him legally, not just violently." Cade looked at her like she'd just suggested they fight a war with poetry. "You want to photograph our way out of this?" "I want to make sure that when this is over, those children still have someone to protect them." Alara's voice was steady. "And that person can't be you if you're dead or in prison for murder." Something shifted in Cade's expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the kind of desperate hope that came from finding an unexpected ally in the wreckage. "Fine," he said. "But if this goes sideways, you run. No heroics. No staying to document the violence. You get out and you don't look back. Deal. They moved fast after that, loading into a nondescript sedan, driving through Seoul's afternoon traffic with the kind of controlled urgency that looked normal but felt apocalyptic. Alara sat in the back, camera in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. She'd photographed war zones, disaster sites, political violence in 3 continents. But none of that prepared her for walking voluntarily into a confrontation with a man who'd orchestrated her father's murder. "You scared?" Lucian asked from the driver's seat. "Terrified." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." They arrived at Cheongdam Tower 23 minutes later, all glass and steel and corporate anonymity, exactly the kind of building where illegal empires hid behind legitimate business fronts. Cade studied the entrance with predatory focus. "Security cameras at every access point," he said. "Keycard entry. Probably biometric on the upper floors. We can't just walk in." "Yes, we can." Alara pulled out her press credentials, the ones that had gotten her into government buildings and military installations and places journalists technically shouldn't access. "I'm doing a story on international business consulting firms in Seoul. I have an appointment." "You don't have an appointment. They don't know that." Cade looked at her with something that might have been admiration or might have been terror. "You're insane." "I'm a photojournalist. It's basically the same thing." They entered through the main lobby, Alara leading with camera and credentials, Cade and Lucian following as her associates, dressed in suits that made them look like business consultants rather than criminals. The security guard barely glanced at her credentials before waving them through. Sometimes confidence was the best camouflage. They took the elevator to the 37th floor, tension ratcheting higher with each ascending number. Alara's hands were shaking. She gripped the camera tighter, using it like a shield. The doors opened onto a pristine hallway, marble floors, recessed lighting, the kind of corporate sterility that screamed money and secrets. The import-export consulting firm occupied the entire floor. Glass doors, frosted privacy film. No visible security, which meant the security was very, very good. "This is a trap," Lucian said quietly. "Obviously." Cade's hand disappeared inside his jacket. "But we're out of better options." They approached the entrance. The doors opened before they could knock. And Victor Seoul stood there smiling like he'd been expecting them. "Cade, Ms. Vale, Lucien." He stepped aside, gesturing them in like welcoming dinner guests. "Please, come in. I've been waiting." The interior was exactly what Alara expected. Minimalist furniture, modern art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's endless sprawl, and 6 armed men positioned throughout the room. Not pointing weapons, just standing, ready. "You knew we were coming," Cade said. "Of course I knew." Victor moved to a bar cart, poured whiskey like this was a social call. "Lee called me the moment you ran facial recognition on his photograph, which, by the way, was sloppy surveillance on his part. I've already terminated his contract." "Terminated?" Alara repeated. Victor's smile widened. "Euphemistically speaking." The implication hung in the air like gunsmoke. "So this is the endgame," Cade said. "You lure us here. Kill us. Blame it on a business dispute gone wrong." "Kill you?" Victor laughed, genuine amusement coloring his voice. No, that would be wasteful. I didn't spend 3 years orchestrating this just to end it with bullets." "Then what do you want?" Victor set down his glass, expression shifting to something colder. "I want you to watch everything you've built disintegrate," he said, "starting in approximately 90 seconds when the first police raid hits your primary money laundering operation in Gangnam, followed by simultaneous raids on 8 other locations across Seoul, all coordinated, all based on anonymous tips I provided to prosecutors this morning." Cade's face went white. The 24-hour deadline, was a lie. Victor's smile was triumphant. "I moved the timeline up to 18 hours ago. While you were sleeping, while you thought you still had time to plan. Those warrants were signed at 6 a.m. The raid started at noon. You've been compromised for hours and didn't even know it." Lucien's phone started buzzing, then Cade's, then 3 more phones carried by the armed men in the room, all receiving simultaneous alerts. The empire was burning. Right now. In real time. "The orphanages," Cade said, voice stripped to nothing. "Already flagged in the warrants." Victor checked his watch. "In about 20 minutes, prosecutors will freeze all assets connected to Black Viper financial networks. Those facilities lose funding immediately. By tomorrow morning, state services will begin transferring children to temporary housing. By the end of the week, those orphanages cease to exist. Cade moved so fast, Alara barely saw it. 1 second he was standing across the room. The next he had Victor by the throat, slammed against the window hard enough to crack glass, gun pressed under his chin. Every armed man in the room raised their weapons. "Stand down," Victor choked out. "He won't shoot." "Test me," Cade said quietly. For the first time since they'd arrived, Victor looked genuinely uncertain. "If you kill me," he managed, "my people have standing orders to target the orphanages directly. Fire, bombs, whatever it takes. Those children die tonight." Cade's hand tightened. Victor's face was turning red. "Cade," Alara said, "stay back. Look at me." Something in her voice made him glance toward her. Alara had her camera raised, not pointed at Victor, at the armed men, at the weapons, at the entire scene. "I'm documenting this," she said calmly. "Every second, every threat, every admission. This entire conversation is evidence." Victor laughed, a strangled, desperate sound. "Evidence of what? That Cade broke into my office and assaulted me? That he's a violent criminal who threatens murder when cornered? Evidence that you orchestrated my father's death," Alara said. "That you admitted to coordinating illegal surveillance, hacking financial systems, and planning to harm children. That every piece of leverage you have is contaminated by your own criminal activity." She lowered the camera slightly, meeting Victor's eyes through the viewfinder. "You wanted Cade to be emotional, violent, predictable, but you forgot something." "What?" "I'm not emotional." Alara's voice was steady as stone. "I'm a professional. And I just documented every word you said admitting to conspiracy, murder, and child endangerment. This camera has cloud backup. Those files are already uploading to secure servers. Even if you kill all of us right now, that evidence still exists." Victor's expression shifted, triumph draining away, replaced by something that looked like genuine fear. "You're bluffing. Try me." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Cade released Victor, stepped back, holstered his weapon with deliberate control. "Here's what's going to happen," he said quietly. "You're going to call off whatever orders you have targeting the orphanages. You're going to provide documentation of every illegal surveillance operation you've conducted. And you're going to testify that your evidence against my organization was obtained through criminal means, which makes it inadmissible. And if I refuse, then Alara's photographs go to the prosecutors, the media, and every rival organization in Seoul." Cade's smile was colder than winter. "And you spend the rest of your very short life looking over your shoulder wondering which one of them reaches you first." Victor's jaw tightened. "You're insane if you think I'll cooperate." "You're dead if you don't." They stared at each other, two men who'd been forged in the same violent world, carrying the same inherited wars, finally facing each other across the wreckage of fathers who destroyed their sons before dying. Then Victor's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his face went absolutely white. "What?" Lucien demanded. Victor turned the screen toward them. The message was from one of his own people. "Police just arrived. They have warrants for you. Something about evidence of murder and conspiracy. You need to run." Alara felt her heart stop. "What did you do?" Victor asked, voice shaking. "I didn't do anything." Cade's expression was carefully blank. "But I did make some calls this morning. To prosecutors I've worked with, judges who owe me favors, people who were very interested to learn about a criminal mastermind who'd been operating in Seoul for 3 years completely under their radar." "You set me up." "No, I just pointed them in the right direction." Cade's smile was genuine this time. "Everything else, your illegal surveillance, your conspiracy to murder, your admission to orchestrating James Vale's death, that was all you." Victor backed toward the window, trapped. The armed men in the room looked between their employer and the exits, clearly calculating whether loyalty was worth prison time. Then the doors burst open. Police flooded in, tactical gear, weapons raised, moving with military precision. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Chaos erupted. Victor's men dropped their weapons. Cade, Lucien, and Alara raised their hands, moving slowly, carefully, while officers screamed commands in Korean. Alara kept her camera raised even as hands grabbed her shoulders, pushed her down, zip-tied her wrists behind her back. She was still photographing, still documenting. Even as Victor was dragged away screaming about false accusations and illegal persecution. Even as Cade was pushed face first onto marble floor, gun pressed to the back of his head, while officers read him rights in rapid Korean. Even as Lucian yelled something that sounded like legal threats and lawyer demands. The arrests took less than 3 minutes. Then they were being hauled toward elevators, separated, processed like criminals because technically they were criminals, regardless of whose side the law pretended to be on. Alara caught Cade's eyes across the chaos. He looked exhausted, relieved, almost peaceful, like this was exactly the ending he'd been expecting all along. Then they were gone, loaded into separate vehicles, driven through Seoul's afternoon traffic toward police headquarters where prosecutors and lawyers and the machinery of justice waited to determine which version of truth would survive interrogation. Alara sat in the back of the police van, hands zip-tied, camera confiscated as evidence, staring at nothing. She'd just documented the arrest of Seoul's most powerful mafia boss, witnessed the collapse of a criminal empire, helped destroy a man who'd murdered her father. But somehow none of it felt like victory, just exhaustion, and the hollow understanding that violence never really ended. It just transformed, evolved, passed from fathers to sons to the people they loved until everyone was contaminated. The van stopped at a red light. Through the window, Alara could see Seoul continuing its indifferent existence. Pedestrians shopping, couples laughing, the ordinary world spinning like none of this apocalypse mattered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Somehow the police had missed it during the arrest. She couldn't reach it with her hands bound, but she felt the vibration against her hip like a second heartbeat. Probably her editor. Probably demanding to know why she'd gone silent for 3 weeks. Probably about to hear a story that would sound completely insane. The van started moving again, and Alara closed her eyes, letting Seoul's neon-soaked chaos fade into exhaustion, wondering what happened to people who survived wars they never meant to fight. Wondering if Cade was thinking the same thing in whatever vehicle was transporting him toward his own reckoning. Wondering if any of this had been worth it. Then her phone buzzed again. And again. Insistent, urgent, like someone desperately needed her attention right now. Alara opened her eyes and realized with sudden, terrible clarity that this wasn't over, not even close. Because Victor Seoul, now arrested, cornered, facing decades in prison, had nothing left to lose, which made him infinitely more dangerous than when he'd been playing chess. Her phone kept buzzing. 17 missed calls, 34 text messages, all from the same unknown number, all saying the same thing. The orphanages. Check the news. Now. And Alara understood with bone-deep certainty that Victor had activated his final play, the one that would destroy everything, even if it meant his own obliteration in the process. Because that's what happened when you cornered a man who'd spent 3 years learning to weaponize grief. He burned, and took everyone with him. The police van hit a pothole, and Alara's shoulder slammed against the metal wall hard enough to make her vision blur. Her phone continued its desperate vibration against her hip. 17 calls becoming 19, becoming 23, each buzz feeling like a countdown to something catastrophic. "Officer," she said in English, then tried again in broken Korean. "My phone. Please. Emergency." The young cop in the passenger seat glanced back, clearly weighing protocol against the genuine panic in her voice. He said something to the driver. The van pulled over. 30 seconds later, Alara's hands were free and she was scrolling through messages with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The first image loaded slowly on the spotty connection, then all at once. Fire. Massive. Uncontrolled. Consuming. An orphanage in Dongdaemun, one of the facilities Cade funded, engulfed in flames that painted Seoul's evening sky the color of apocalypse. The timestamp showed 18 minutes ago. Alara scrolled frantically. More messages, more images. 3 other orphanages, all burning simultaneously, all across Seoul. Coordinated arson executed with military precision, while police resources were concentrated on the arrest at Cheongdam Tower. Victor's final move, the one that required nothing except matches and gasoline and men, loyal enough or desperate enough to commit mass murder by proxy. "No," Alara whispered. Then louder, "No! No! No!" The cop was talking to her in rapid Korean, clearly alarmed by her reaction. Alara shoved the phone toward him, hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. He looked at the screen. His face went white. He spoke urgently into his radio. Static. Confirmation. Chaos bleeding through the transmission. The driver executed an illegal U-turn that threw Alara against the opposite wall, and suddenly they were racing back toward Gangnam, sirens screaming, the ordinary Seoul traffic scattering like birds before a storm. Alara's mind was fracturing. Children. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds across 4 facilities. All because she'd thought documenting evidence would be enough to stop a man who'd spent 3 years learning to weaponize grief. Her phone buzzed again. Text message from Lucien. Cade knows. Police released him on emergency protocols. He's heading to Dongdaemun. Don't try to stop him. Then another message immediately after. He's going to do something unforgivable. The van carved through Seoul's evening chaos like a missile, emergency lights painting everything in strobing red and blue. Alara could see smoke now, massive columns rising above the skyline, visible even through the urban density. Her photographer's instincts cataloged details mechanically. Wind direction southwest, flames visible from 6 kilometers away, meaning the fires were already beyond initial containment. Her human instincts just screamed. They arrived at the Dongdaemun facility 11 minutes later. The scene was biblical. Fire engines positioned at 3 angles, water arcing through smoke-thick air, doing absolutely nothing to slow the inferno's consumption. Police barriers holding back crowds of onlookers filming the catastrophe on their phones like entertainment. Ambulances lined up with paramedics treating smoke inhalation victims on the street. And children. So many children. Wrapped in emergency blankets, faces black with soot, eyes wide with shock, being shepherded toward waiting buses by social workers who looked equally traumatized. Alara stumbled out of the van before it fully stopped, camera forgotten, moving toward the nearest cluster of kids on pure instinct. A social worker tried to stop her. Press, Alara said in English, flashing credentials she'd somehow kept through the arrest. I need to document us. No press, the woman said firmly. These children have been through enough. But Alara wasn't looking at the children anymore. She was looking at the man standing 30 meters away, silhouetted against the flames, completely motionless despite the chaos erupting around him. Cade, still in the suit from the arrest, still wearing zip-tie marks on his wrists where they'd cut him free, staring at the burning building like he was watching his own execution. Alara pushed through the crowd, reached him, put her hand on his arm. He didn't react, didn't even seem to register her presence, just kept staring at the flames consuming everything he'd tried to protect. Cade, she said quietly. Nothing. They got out. Look, all those children over there. They're alive. The staff evacuated them in time. Not all of them. His voice was hollow, mechanical. They're saying 3 are still missing. 3 children who were in the back dormitory when the fire started. They didn't make it out. Alara's stomach dropped. They don't know that for sure. Yes, they do. Cade's hands were shaking. The section collapsed 12 minutes ago. No one could survive that. Around them, firefighters continued their futile battle against physics and chemistry, water evaporating before it could touch flame-consumed wood. Victor did this, Alara said. Not you. I let him get close enough to do it, Cade's voice cracked. I thought I could outmaneuver him. Thought documenting evidence and playing by legal rules would be enough. But this world doesn't work that way. It never has. So what are you going to do? For the first time since she'd reached him, Cade looked at her. His eyes were completely empty. Not angry, not grieving, just void. Whatever I should have done the moment Victor became a problem, he said quietly. Before legal solutions, before strategy, before trying to be anything except what I was trained to be. He started walking, not toward the burning building, toward a black sedan parked at the edge of the chaos, one Alara recognized from Cade's security detail. Wait. Alara grabbed his arm. You can't just leave. The police will think... I don't care what they think. Cade pulled free gently, but firmly. Victor's being held at the central station, standard holding cell before transfer to prosecution offices. He has 4 guards, maybe 6, all of them following protocols that assume he's just another criminal instead of someone who just murdered children. Understanding crashed over Alara like ice water. You're going to kill him. Yes, in a police station. If necessary. That's insane. That's suicide. That's justice. Cade's voice was perfectly calm. The kind that this city understands. The kind that makes sure Victor never breathes free air again, regardless of what prosecutors can prove or judges can sentence. And you'll go to prison. For life. Maybe worse. Good. Something that might have been relief crossed Cade's face. Those children are dead because I hesitated. Because I tried to be better than my father, better than the empire he built. But this world doesn't reward being better. It rewards being effective. He opened the sedan door. Elara made a decision that probably made her just as insane as everyone else in this story. She got in the passenger side. Cade looked at her like she'd just volunteered for execution. Get out. No. Elara, if you're going to do this, you're not doing it alone. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. I documented everything else. I might as well document the ending too. This isn't some photojournalism assignment. This is premeditated murder. I know. You'll be complicit. An accessory. You could go to prison. Then I guess we'll be cellmates. For a long moment, Cade just stared at her. Then Lucien appeared at the driver's window, breathing hard, face blackened with soot. Don't, he said. Get in or get out of the way, Cade replied. You do this and everything we just accomplished means nothing. Victor goes down as a martyr. You become the villain. The prosecutors drop their case because their key witness murdered the defendant. Those orphanages lose funding anyway because your entire empire gets dismantled. Then it gets dismantled. I don't care anymore. Yes, you do. Lucien's voice cracked. You care so much it's killing you, but this isn't the answer. Then what is? Living with it. Lucien's eyes were bright with tears. Carrying the weight. Surviving long enough to rebuild what he destroyed. That's the revenge that actually works. Not bullets, not martyrdom, just refusing to let him turn you into the monster he claimed you already were. The words hung in the smoke-thick air. Behind them, firefighters finally gained control of one section of the inferno, water beginning to overwhelm flame in a hissing, steaming victory that came too late to save anything that mattered. Cade's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 3 children, he said quietly. 3 children who trusted that I could protect them. Who thought the world was safe because I made it safe. And I failed them. Yes, Lucien said simply. You did, and you'll carry that for the rest of your life. But you don't get to escape it by becoming what Victor wanted you to become. Elara watched something break in Cade's expression, the last piece of armor finally cracking open to show the human underneath. He looked at her. Your father, he said. When he photographed that girl in Afghanistan, the one with the broken doll, do you think he regretted not helping her instead? Elara thought about the question she'd asked her father years ago, about his answer, about the weight he'd carried every day since. Yes, she said quietly, every single day for the rest of his life. But he survived it. And he kept photographing, kept documenting, kept bearing witness even when it hurt, because that's what people do when they choose to stay human in inhuman situations. Cade closed his eyes, breathed, let go of the steering wheel like releasing a weapon. I'm so tired, he whispered. I know, Elara said. I don't know how to keep doing this. Neither do I. They sat in the sedan while Seoul burned around them, 2 people who'd collided through grief and violence and coincidence, trying to figure out if survival was victory or just slower defeat. Then Cade's phone rang. He answered, listened. His expression shifted through several emotions Elara couldn't identify before settling on something that looked like cautious hope. When? He asked. Pause. All of them? Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He disconnected, looked at Elara and Lucien. That was the site coordinator at the Dongdaemun facility, he said carefully. They just found the 3 missing children, trapped in a service corridor, smoke inhalation, burns. But alive. All of them alive. The words didn't register at first, then all at once. Alive. Not dead. Not martyrs to Victor's revenge. Just 3 traumatized kids who'd survived because someone, a staff member, a firefighter, some underpaid hero whose name would never make headlines, had kept looking when everyone else assumed the worst. Elara felt something crack open in her chest, Not relief exactly, something more complicated. The horrible understanding that sometimes survival was just luck and timing and chance, instead of justice or strategy or anything humans could control. Cade dropped his forehead against the steering wheel. His shoulders shook, not crying exactly, just the physiological collapse that happened when someone had been holding themselves together through pure willpower and the pressure finally released. Lucian reached through the window and gripped his brother's shoulder. Said something in Korean that Alara didn't understand but recognized as the kind of thing brothers said when words weren't adequate. They stayed like that for a long time, a frozen tableau against the backdrop of controlled chaos, until Cade finally straightened, wiped his face, and started the engine. "Hospital," he said. "I need to see them." They drove through Seoul's evening traffic in silence, processing the last hour's emotional whiplash, while the city continued its indifferent existence around them. Lara stared out the window, watching neon bleed into darkness, trying to reconcile the person she'd been 3 weeks ago with whoever she was now. The photojournalist who'd arrived in Seoul carrying grief and a camera had disappeared somewhere in the space between that first rainy photograph and sitting in a Mafia Boss's sedan driving toward a hospital to check on children who'd nearly died in a revenge plot 30 years in the making. She wasn't sure who'd replaced her. Just someone more complicated, more compromised, more aware that the line between documentation and participation was thinner than she'd ever acknowledged. They arrived at Seoul Medical Center 37 minutes later. The pediatric wing was controlled chaos: doctors, nurses, social workers, police officers, and what looked like half of Seoul's child welfare infrastructure trying to process 4 simultaneous arson cases and coordinate care for dozens of traumatized children. Cade moved through it like a ghost. No one stopped him, either because they recognized him or because he carried himself with enough quiet authority that interference seemed impossible. He found the room where the 3 missing children were being treated, 2 girls and 1 boy, none older than 7, hooked to IVs and oxygen monitors while exhausted medical staff tracked vitals and administered care. Cade stood in the doorway, didn't enter, just watched them breathe. One of the girls noticed him. Her face lit up despite the oxygen mask. "Cadesitsi," she said in small voice muffled by plastic. He moved then, crossing to her bedside, kneeling so they were eye level, taking her small hand with a gentleness that looked physically painful. "I'm sorry," he said quietly in Korean. The girl shook her head, an emphatic no that made her oxygen line tangle. "You saved us," she said. "The lady told us. She said you sent firefighters to check the back corridor, even when everyone thought we were gone. You saved us." Cade's throat worked. He couldn't speak, just held this child's hand while she smiled at him like he was a hero instead of a criminal who'd gotten her caught in someone else's war. Alara raised her camera. She'd been documenting violence and strategy and collapse for weeks. Maybe it was time to document something else. The shutter clicked. Once. Capturing Cade Juan, Seoul's most feared mafia boss, on his knees beside a hospital bed holding a child's hand, looking more human than Alara had ever seen him. No armor, no empire. Just a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle, remembering what it felt like. She lowered the camera, met his eyes across the hospital room. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition that she'd seen the version of him he'd been trying to excavate from beneath 15 years of violence. The version that still existed, battered and exhausted and barely functional, but present. The next 72 hours blurred together in a chaotic sequence of police interviews, prosecutor meetings, emergency child welfare hearings, and legal maneuvering that made Alara's head spin. Victor Seo was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and enough additional charges that his lawyer spent the first hearing just listing them. The evidence from Alara's camera, combined with testimony from Cade, Lucian, and 3 of Victor's own men, who decided cooperation was preferable to life imprisonment, built a case so airtight that even Seoul's notoriously corrupt legal system couldn't dismiss it. Victor would spend the rest of his life in prison. No parole, no appeals. Just decades of watching the revenge he'd spent 3 years orchestrating collapse into legal rubble. But the cost was steep. The Black Viper Syndicate's money laundering operations were exposed entirely. Prosecutors seized assets worth nearly $2 billion. Luxury hotels, real estate developments, underground banking networks, all frozen pending investigation, including the funding for the orphanages. Cade made the deal he'd been planning before everything exploded. Full cooperation, full admission, full responsibility for 15 years of organized crime in exchange for the orphanages transitioning to legitimate nonprofit status under new management. The prosecutors accepted. Cade was sentenced to 8 years in minimum security prison for financial crimes, a fraction of what his actual criminal history warranted, but enough to satisfy public demands for justice while keeping him alive long enough to serve the sentence. Lucien took over what remained of the legitimate business operations. The criminal empire died with Victor's arrest, just dissolved like morning fog when sunlight finally penetrated. And Seoul moved on the way cities always did, absorbing catastrophe into its endless churn of commerce and chaos, until even the fires became just another story people told about that one crazy month when the gangs went to war. On Cade's last day before prison transfer, Alara visited him in the holding facility where he was being kept pending final processing. They sat across from each other in a sterile interview room under fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out and temporary. "You came," Cade said. "Of course I came." "I thought you'd gone back to Atlanta by now." "Not yet." Alara pulled out her camera, held it between them like a bridge. "I'm staying to finish the story." "What story?" "The real one. Not the version the media's reporting. Not the simplified good versus evil narrative. The actual truth about what happened here." Cade smiled, tired but genuine. "That sounds dangerous." "Most true things are." They were quiet for a moment. Then Cade reached across the table, as far as the security chain would allow, and Alara met him halfway. Their fingers touched, just barely. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "About your father. About lying, about dragging you into this war." "I'm not." Alara's voice was steady. "If you hadn't, I'd still be wandering around Atlanta pretending grief was the same as living. You reminded me what it feels like to care about something enough to risk everything." "That's a terrible lesson." "Maybe, but it's better than the alternative." Cade's thumb traced the edge of her hand, the smallest gesture carrying weight neither of them could quite articulate. "When I get out," he said, 8 years from now, if you're still in Seoul, I'll be here," Alara interrupted. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "Why?" She thought about the photograph she'd taken that first rainy night in Gangnam, about the exhausted man standing alone beneath fractured neon, about all the ways violence and grief and coincidence could collide to create something that looked like destiny. "Because someone needs to document your parole hearing," she said. "And I take really good photographs." Cade laughed, a real sound, unguarded and bright despite the context. Then the guard appeared to end the visitation. Alara stood, raised her camera one last time. "May I?" Cade nodded. The shutter clicked. One final photograph. A man in prison blues looking at the camera with eyes that still carried exhaustion, but also something new. Hope, maybe. Or just the stubborn refusal to let violence define him completely. Alara lowered the camera. "See you in 8 years, she said. "That's a long time. I've waited longer for good stories to develop." She left before the ache in her chest could translate into tears. 3 months later, Alara Vale's photo essay was published in 6 major international outlets simultaneously. The images documented everything, from that first rainy night in Gangnam to the hospital room where children smiled at a criminal who'd remembered how to be gentle. No simplified narratives, no heroes or villains, just humans making impossible choices in a world that offered no good options. The essay won 3 journalism awards and got Alara job offers from every major publication on 4 continents. She turned them all down. Instead, she opened a small studio in Seoul's Yeonam-dong district and started teaching photography to kids from the orphanages Cade had funded, the ones that had survived restructuring and now operated as legitimate nonprofits, teaching them how to hold cameras, how to witness truth, how to document beauty and violence with equal honesty, how to see the world as something complex enough to contain both horror and grace simultaneously. On the anniversary of her father's death, Alara stood on the Lotte Tower observation deck where she'd first met Cade for that sunset confrontation. She looked out at Seoul's endless sprawl, the city that had rewritten her life through rain and neon and collision. And she thought about the photograph her father had taken in Afghanistan, the little girl with the broken doll, the image he'd carried for the rest of his life, the weight of witnessing. Alara understood now why he'd chosen to photograph instead of intervene. Some moments were too important to interrupt. You witnessed them, you documented them, and you carried the weight of what you saw, hoping that bearing witness was its own form of resistance against the world's casual cruelty. Her phone buzzed. Email from Lucienne with an attached photo. She opened it. The image showed Cade in prison, thinner, grayer, but smiling at the camera while teaching a group of incarcerated men how to grow vegetables in the facility's garden program. Still finding ways to be gentle, even inside walls designed for punishment. The caption read, "He wanted you to see this. Says to tell you he's practicing for his parole hearing photographs." Alara smiled, saved the image, added it to the folder on her laptop labeled Seoul that now contained thousands of photographs documenting 3 months that had felt like 3 lifetimes. Then she picked up her camera and headed out into the city. There were always more stories to witness, more complicated truths to document, more humans surviving in impossible situations that deserve to be remembered. That's what photographers did. They carried other people's weight, made it visible, refused to let suffering or grace or the messy, complicated middle disappear into the noise. And standing beneath Seoul's eternal neon, Alara Vale, daughter of a criminal who'd tried to be better, witness to a war older than her birth, photographer of truths too complex for simple narratives, finally understood what her father had been trying to teach her all along. Being human meant making mistakes, sometimes catastrophic ones, but it also meant choosing every single day to keep witnessing, keep documenting, keep believing that truth mattered even when it was ugly and complicated and didn't fit into neat moral categories. She raised her camera toward the skyline, clicked the shutter, captured Seoul exactly as it was, beautiful and broken and endlessly alive, just like everyone trying to survive inside it. And somewhere across the city, in a minimum security prison, Cade Huan probably felt the moment through whatever invisible thread connected people who'd survived catastrophe together. Probably smiled. Probably understood that she was still there, still witnessing, still refusing to let violence have the final word. Because that's what people did when they chose to stay human in inhuman situations. They kept breathing, kept fighting, kept documenting. And they survived long enough to see that sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't weapons or empires or inherited wars. It was 2 people deciding to see each other clearly, without armor, without performance, just human to human, carrying weight together and calling it hope.